She walked through the door expecting a normal Tuesday morning, and instead froze completely at the sight of professional movers carefully stacking cardboard boxes near the entrance. Her clothes, toiletries, makeup bags, and personal belongings were piled systematically in the center of our living room. The landlord stood beside me with his arms crossed firmly, his expression neutral but his presence unmistakably official as he explained calmly that she had until midnight to collect all of her things. Before she could formulate any argument or excuse, I placed the printed photos deliberately on the kitchen counter. Clear, undeniable images of her laughing with her ex-boyfriend on a restaurant patio 600 kilometers from where she'd claimed to be visiting family. The proof was right there in full color, time-stamped and geotagged, showing her leaning close to him with the kind of smile she hadn't given me in months. Her mouth opened slightly, but absolutely nothing came out. No explanations, no denials, no carefully rehearsed lies. Just stunned silence as reality crashed down around her. The confident woman who'd walked in moments ago vanished completely, replaced by someone who suddenly understood she'd been caught in an elaborate web of her own creation. I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than any accusation I could have made. 2 months earlier, she told me we were just in a rough patch and needed some space to figure things out. I believed her completely because I wanted to believe her. She mentioned visiting her family for a week to clear her head and get perspective on our relationship. I didn't question the plan because things between us really had felt increasingly strained lately. That was the very first time I deliberately ignored the gut feeling that something was fundamentally off. The first time I chose comfortable denial over uncomfortable truth. She seemed so sincere when she explained that distance might actually help us reconnect, that stepping back could bring us closer together. I'd helped her pack for the trip, making sure she had everything she needed, kissed her goodbye at the door and told her to take all the time she needed. Genuinely meant it too. I thought we were working through normal relationship struggles, the kind every couple faces eventually. Looking back now with clear eyes, I could see all the warning signs I'd deliberately ignored. The way she avoided eye contact when discussing the trip, how vague she was about specific plans, the nervous energy that didn't match someone just visiting family. But back then, I was still trying to save something she'd already abandoned. When she finally returned from her supposed family trip, she was noticeably different in ways I couldn't quite name at first. Overly friendly in a performative way, but emotionally absent beneath the surface smile. Like she was playing the role of my girlfriend rather than actually being my girlfriend. She avoided physical intimacy completely, claiming work stress and exhaustion whenever I tried to reconnect. She started going out significantly more often with vague friends I'd never met, leaving me alone at home with increasingly thin explanations. Each flimsy excuse chipped away a little piece of the stability I'd thought we had. "I just need to blow off some steam with the girls," she'd say, already halfway out the door before I could respond. Or, "You wouldn't be interested, it's just work people grabbing drinks." The pattern became predictable quickly. Announce plans, minimize details, leave before questions could be asked. I tried desperately to be understanding and supportive. Told myself she was genuinely overwhelmed with life pressures I didn't fully understand. I didn't want to be the controlling boyfriend who questioned every outing or demanded constant updates. Most of all, I absolutely didn't want to lose her. So I stayed quiet, swallowed my concerns, and hoped things would eventually improve on their own. She began coming home later and later as weeks passed. Sometimes midnight, sometimes 2 in the morning, occasionally not at all. When she didn't come home, she'd text generic explanations about staying at a friend's place because she didn't want us to fight about her being out late. The logic seemed reasonable on the surface. Why drive home exhausted when she could crash somewhere safe? But something about the phrasing always felt carefully rehearsed rather than spontaneous. Like she'd practiced the excuse until it sounded natural and believable. I told myself repeatedly she was just overwhelmed with work and social obligations, that the rough patch we were experiencing was genuinely temporary. Back then, I was still actively trying to fix things she'd already completely given up on, still believing we had a future worth fighting for. I'd wait up for her sometimes, scrolling mindlessly through my phone until I heard her key in the lock. She'd slip in quietly, kiss my forehead briefly, and head straight to the shower. Always the shower first, no matter how late. I never questioned why. The truth was obvious in hindsight, but I'd been too afraid of what I'd find if I actually looked. So I kept my eyes closed and hoped for the best. One night she texted that she was crashing at Jenna, but something about her phrasing felt immediately rehearsed and artificial. Too casual, too quick. I checked her social media automatically, seeing nothing unusual in her recent posts. Still, I couldn't shake the persistent feeling I was being carefully managed rather than honestly informed. I didn't act on the suspicion directly, just started making quiet mental notes of inconsistencies. Times she said she'd be one place, but her location didn't quite match. Friends she mentioned that I'd never heard of before. Stories that changed slightly in the retelling. I wasn't ready to openly admit where this relationship was actually heading. Wasn't prepared to face the possibility that the woman I loved was systematically lying to me. The evidence was accumulating slowly, but I kept pushing it aside, choosing hope over harsh reality. Part of me recognized I was being a fool. The smarter, more self-protective part of my brain kept sending warning signals I deliberately ignored. But love makes you stupid sometimes, makes you overlook things you'd never tolerate from anyone else. So I kept silent, kept trusting, kept hoping things would somehow magically improve without confrontation or change. Trying desperately to save the relationship before it completely collapsed, I suggested couples therapy as a constructive option. She immediately brushed it off as way too dramatic for our situation and accused me directly of overthinking everything. That dismissal stung more deeply than I initially admitted to myself. "We don't need therapy, we just need time," she'd said with barely concealed irritation. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be. Couples go through rough patches all the time without running to a therapist." I backed off immediately, not wanting to seem pushy or controlling. But something fundamental changed in me during that conversation. I stopped automatically assuming she was telling the truth. Instead, I began quietly observing her behavior with more critical eyes. I started noticing small things I'd previously overlooked. How she angled her phone screen away from me when texting. How she'd leave the room to take certain calls. How she'd become vague about her schedule in ways she never had been before. The trust that had been the foundation of our relationship was developing serious cracks. And once you start questioning someone's honesty, it's almost impossible to stop. Every statement becomes something to verify rather than something to simply believe. She announced another girls' night out, barely making eye contact while delivering the information. I told her casually to have fun, but my chest felt physically heavy with dread. For the first time, I genuinely wondered if I was living with someone who didn't care about me at all anymore. The thought lingered persistently long after she left, perfume trailing behind her as she headed out the door. I tried desperately to shake it off, to convince myself I was being paranoid and jealous, but the feeling wouldn't leave. It settled into my bones, cold and certain. I spent that entire evening alone, sitting in the dark living room, replaying months of interactions in my mind, seeing them differently now, understanding them from a new, uncomfortable perspective. The puzzle pieces were starting to form a picture I really didn't want to see. She came home around 2 in the morning, smelling like cigarette smoke, though she didn't smoke. She headed straight for the shower again without explaining the late hour. I pretended to be asleep, listening to the water run for what seemed like forever. Something was wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. I just wasn't ready to confront it yet. A week later, she announced abruptly she needed another break and wanted to visit her family again. This time she'd be gone for a full week, maybe longer. She kissed my cheek briefly and packed surprisingly light for an extended trip. I watched her leave through the window, the unease settling even deeper into my chest. My instincts were finally screaming loud enough that I couldn't ignore them anymore. The pattern was too obvious now. The sudden need for distance, the vague destinations, the minimal packing, the relief on her face as she walked out the door. I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never done before. I checked her location sharing, which we'd set up months ago for safety reasons. It showed her phone near the airport initially, then stopped updating entirely. Either she'd turned off her phone or disabled location services deliberately. That's when I knew for certain. People visiting family don't turn off their location. People hiding something do. The realization hit me like ice water, cold, shocking, undeniable. She wasn't visiting her family at all. I sat alone in our apartment, finally accepting the truth I'd been avoiding for months. She was cheating on me, had probably been cheating for a while, and I'd been too trusting or too scared to see it. During my lunch break 3 days later, I walked past a restaurant patio in the city center and froze mid-step. There she was, sitting comfortably with her ex-boyfriend, leaning in close across the table, smiling in that radiant way she hadn't smiled with me in months. They weren't arguing or having an uncomfortable catch-up conversation. They were clearly on a date. The hurt didn't hit all at once like an explosion. Instead, it came slow and cold, spreading through my chest like ice water in my veins. I stood there on the sidewalk, half hidden behind a tree, watching the woman I loved be affectionate with someone else, watching her be happy in a way she no longer was with me. They laughed together about something, completely comfortable in each other's presence. She touched his hand across the table. He leaned back with easy confidence, clearly enjoying himself. This wasn't a chance encounter. It was planned, intimate, familiar. The restaurant was at least 600 kilometers from where she'd claimed to be visiting family. The lie was absolute and undeniable. There was no possible innocent explanation for what I was witnessing. No way to spin this into something acceptable or forgivable. I felt myself disconnect emotionally, like part of my brain was protecting me from the full impact of what I was seeing. Instead of confronting her immediately in a public scene, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and took several photos. My hands trembled badly but stayed steady enough to capture clear evidence. They laughed together again, completely comfortable and unaware they were being documented. I walked away quickly before she could possibly see me standing there. By the time I reached home, something fundamental inside me had locked permanently into place. The confusion and self-doubt evaporated completely, replaced by cold clarity. I wasn't crazy or paranoid or controlling. I was being systematically lied to and betrayed. I transferred the photos immediately to my laptop and backed them up in 3 separate locations. Evidence this clear couldn't be lost or denied. The timestamps, the geolocation data, the unmistakable intimacy, everything was documented perfectly. Then I sat down and began thinking practically rather than emotionally. Getting angry wouldn't help me. Making a scene wouldn't change anything. What I needed now was a plan. A way to extract myself from this toxic situation with dignity and finality. She'd been lying to me for months, maybe longer, playing me for a fool while maintaining her comfortable life in our apartment. That ended now. Not with screaming or confrontation, but with calculated action that would leave no room for manipulation or gaslighting. I didn't cry that night. I didn't shout at the walls or throw things in anger. I just sat completely still on the couch in heavy silence, staring at the photos on my phone. Every lie she'd told me replayed itself in my mind in perfect chronological order. The family visits, the girls' nights, the work stress, the need for space. The story she'd been carefully feeding me for months finally made complete sense. She'd been building a parallel life with her ex while using me for stability and financial support. Every excuse had been calculated, every explanation carefully crafted. She'd been playing a role this entire time. It hurt deeply. The betrayal cut straight through everything I'd believed about our relationship. But the pain also brought absolute clarity about what had to happen next. There was no saving this. No couples therapy could fix deliberate, sustained deception. No conversation would make this right. I felt something shift inside me, like a door closing permanently. The man who desperately wanted to fix things and make her happy was gone, replaced by someone who understood that some people don't deserve your loyalty or forgiveness. By morning, I'd made my decision. I would handle this methodically, quietly, and completely. She would never see it coming. After seeing those devastating photos, I started thinking practically rather than emotionally about my situation. If I was going to extract myself from this toxic relationship, I needed to understand my options clearly. I pulled out our lease agreement and read through it carefully for the first time in months. That's when I discovered something critically important. She wasn't actually listed as a tenant anywhere in the official documentation. Her name appeared nowhere on the lease. That meant legally she had absolutely no claim to stay in the apartment if I gave proper notice to vacate. The lease was entirely in my name alone. Suddenly, the path forward became crystal clear in my mind. I could end the lease, move out completely, and she'd have no legal right to remain in the apartment. She'd been living there as my guest essentially, not as an official tenant with protected rights. I began quietly planning the next steps, keeping everything organized in a private document she'd never see. Timelines, phone numbers, logistics, everything mapped out methodically. This wasn't about revenge yet. It was about escape, about reclaiming my life from someone who'd been systematically destroying it. Revenge would come later, in the form of her complete shock when she realized what she'd lost. When she understood I'd known everything and chosen to leave her with nothing. Still saying absolutely nothing to her about what I'd discovered, I scheduled an appointment with our landlord for the following week. I explained the situation honestly, that my relationship had deteriorated badly and I needed to give notice. I showed him the photos as context, wanting him to understand this wasn't impulsive. He was surprisingly sympathetic to my position and offered to coordinate apartment showings only during times when she wasn't home. That way I could plan my exit without constant conflict or her catching on to what was happening. I thanked him quietly, careful not to seem vindictive or bitter despite everything. The plan wasn't about revenge yet. It was primarily about escape, about extracting myself cleanly from a situation that had become emotionally toxic. Revenge would simply be the natural consequence of her actions catching up with her, the shock on her face when she realized she'd lost everything. I left the landlord's office feeling strangely calm and focused. Having a concrete plan made everything feel manageable rather than overwhelming. I wasn't helpless anymore. I was taking back control of my life from someone who'd been manipulating it for months. She had no idea what was coming, and that was exactly how I wanted it. I began actively hunting for a new apartment that same week. I toured available units during my lunch breaks and immediately after work, keeping my schedule carefully tight so she'd never notice my extended absences. I told her I was working late on an important project, which she accepted without question. Finding the right place took about 10 days of searching. I needed something I could afford alone, in a neighborhood I actually liked, available on my timeline. When I finally found a one-bedroom unit that checked all my boxes, I signed the lease immediately that same day. There was absolutely no hesitation left in me. The landlord at the new place asked if I needed time to think about it. I told him no, I'd made my decision. He seemed slightly surprised by my certainty but processed the application efficiently. Within 48 hours, I had keys to my new apartment. I visited the empty space that evening after she'd left for another mysterious night out, stood in the middle of the vacant living room and felt genuine peace for the first time in months. This was mine alone. No lies, no betrayal, no constant anxiety about where she really was. The countdown had begun. I just had to hold everything together for a few more weeks. I gave my current landlord official notice the very next day. He nodded professionally and said he'd handle the transition as discreetly as possible. He mentioned he already had several interested potential tenants ready to view the unit. Everything was moving faster than I'd originally expected, but it felt completely right. The lease required 30 days' notice, which meant I had exactly 1 month to execute my plan. 1 month to pack everything that mattered, coordinate movers, and prepare for the final confrontation. 1 month of pretending everything was normal while systematically dismantling the life we'd built. I walked home from the landlord's office feeling strangely detached from everything, like I was watching myself move through the motions from somewhere far away. The emotional connection I'd had to our shared apartment had completely evaporated. It was just a place now, not a home. She was cooking dinner when I arrived, humming along to music, completely unaware that her comfortable life was about to collapse. I watched her move around our kitchen and felt absolutely nothing. No love, no anger, no regret. Just empty space where feelings used to be. "How was your day?" she asked with false brightness. "Fine," I replied simply. "Normal day." At home over the following weeks, she tried repeatedly to initiate small talk and casual conversation. I kept my responses brief but deliberately calm. No fights, no accusations, no emotional outbursts that might alert her something was wrong. I was physically present, but emotionally I'd already completely left. She didn't notice my withdrawal at all. Her attention was clearly elsewhere. She'd scroll through her phone constantly, smiling at messages she'd never share. She'd take calls in another room. She'd make plans without including me. The relationship had become a hollow shell both of us were pretending still existed. I started packing slowly and discreetly during the time she was out. A few items from the back of closets, books from shelves she never looked at, kitchen items she wouldn't miss. Nothing obvious enough to raise questions, but steady progress toward my eventual exit. She came home late most nights now, barely bothering with detailed explanations anymore. Sometimes she'd text she wasn't coming home at all. I'd simply respond, "Okay," without asking follow-up questions. My complete lack of reaction seemed to embolden her further. Every night she spent away made my exit easier, made it clearer that I wasn't abandoning something real. I was escaping something that had already ended months ago. She checked out of our relationship long before I did. She kept staying out late with increasing frequency as the weeks passed. Sometimes she wouldn't come home until morning, arriving with disheveled clothes and smelling distinctly like someone else's cologne. She'd give elaborate explanations without being asked, like she needed to fill the silence with plausible stories. "Traffic was crazy, so I just crashed at Amanda," she'd say. Or, "We were having such a good time I didn't notice how late it got." The lies flowed effortlessly now, refined through months of practice. I simply nodded each time, my face neutral and unrevealing. Each time I accepted her explanations without question, her confidence visibly grew. She truly thought I had absolutely no idea what was happening. Thought I was just a trusting fool who believed whatever she told me. That confidence would make the final revelation even more devastating. I watched her lie to my face repeatedly and felt nothing but cold determination. She'd created this situation entirely through her own choices. I was simply making sure she'd face the full consequences of those choices all at once, with no warning and no time to prepare excuses. The countdown continued. 2 weeks left, then 1 week, then just days. With 2 weeks left before my planned move-out date, the landlord began showing our unit to potential new tenants. Always carefully scheduled when she was out, as we'd agreed. I'd get a text asking if the coast was clear, and I'd confirm she was gone for several hours. Prospective renters would walk through, commenting on the space and asking questions. I'd answer politely, playing the role of helpful current tenant. The landlord would handle the business details. Within a week, he'd accepted an application from a young couple who wanted to move in exactly when my lease ended. Meanwhile, I packed slowly and discreetly, working primarily during her absences. I hired movers for the final day, scheduling them for early morning when I knew she'd either be out or just getting home from wherever she'd spent the night. Everything was coordinated precisely. She never questioned why some drawers were emptier or why certain shelves looked less full. She was far too distracted by her secret life to notice anything changing in our actual shared space. Her complete obliviousness to the dismantling happening around her was almost funny. The irony wasn't lost on me. While she'd been secretly destroying our relationship, I'd been secretly planning my escape. We'd both been living double lives in our own way. I booked the moving crew for early morning on the last official day of my lease. The landlord agreed to be present to make everything completely official and legal. I printed multiple copies of the photos showing her with her ex, along with phone records and receipts proving she definitely hadn't traveled anywhere near her family during her supposed visits. Not to throw at her dramatically or make a scene, but to leave absolutely no room for manipulation, gaslighting, or playing the victim. If she tried claiming she didn't know why this was happening, I'd have undeniable proof of her betrayal ready to present calmly. I organized everything in a folder that stayed hidden in my car, rehearsed what I'd say if she tried to argue or create drama, prepared myself mentally for tears, anger, accusations, whatever emotional manipulation she might attempt. I wouldn't be moved by any of it. The plan was simple. Movers would pack and load my belongings while she was out. The landlord would explain she had to vacate by midnight since she wasn't on the lease. I'd present evidence if she questioned why. Then I'd leave and never look back. Clean, final, and completely devastating for her. Exactly what she deserved. The night before moving day, she didn't come home at all. She sent a blurry, barely coherent text around midnight about staying at a friend's place. Some excuse about drinking too much to drive safely. I replied simply, "Okay," and turned my phone face down on the nightstand. I slept better that night than I had in months. The clarity was almost peaceful. Tomorrow would be difficult, but it would also be final. No more lies, no more pretending, no more anxiety about where she really was or who she was really with. I woke before dawn feeling strangely calm, made coffee, reviewed the plan one final time, texted the movers to confirm they were on schedule. Everything was proceeding exactly as I'd arranged. This would be the last morning I'd wake up in this apartment that had stopped feeling like home months ago. By this time tomorrow, I'd be in my new place, alone but free, starting over without someone who'd been systematically betraying me. The thought brought genuine relief rather than sadness. That's how I knew I was making absolutely the right decision. The moving crew arrived promptly at dawn. We worked quickly and quietly, boxing up everything that was mine, which turned out to be almost the entire apartment's worth of belongings. The furniture, the kitchen supplies, the electronics, the decorations. I'd bought essentially everything when we'd moved in together. Her belongings fit into just a few modest piles in the living room. Some clothes, toiletries, personal items, not enough to fill even half a room. She'd been living comfortably in a space I'd completely furnished and paid for while cheating behind my back. The landlord arrived shortly after the movers started, double-checking details for the official walkthrough. He was professional and efficient, making notes on his clipboard. The apartment already looked like I'd never lived there, empty and echoing as boxes disappeared into the moving truck. By 9:30, everything was loaded. My entire life packed up and ready to go. The movers waited by their truck while I did one final check of the empty rooms. making absolutely sure I hadn't left anything important behind, anything I'd regret leaving for her to destroy or throw away. Everything important was safe. Now I just had to wait for her to arrive. Around 10 in the morning, she walked through the door expecting normalcy. She froze completely at the sight of professional movers standing in our nearly empty apartment, stared at them confused, then at the landlord in his official capacity, then finally at me with growing comprehension and fear. I didn't speak first. I simply pointed calmly to the stack of printed photos sitting prominently on the kitchen counter, her face drained of every bit of color as she recognized herself in the images, her laughing with her ex at that restaurant, leaning close, touching his hand, obviously on a date hundreds of kilometers from where she'd claimed to be. What she started, voice barely above a whisper. I still didn't respond. Just let her look at the evidence of her betrayal laid out clearly. Let her understand that I knew everything. That I'd known for weeks and chosen not to confront her directly, but to plan my exit instead. Her hands shook as she picked up the photos. She looked at each one, her expression shifting from shock to guilt to desperate panic. When she finally looked back up at me, I saw her searching for some explanation, some excuse that might somehow make this okay. There wasn't one, we both knew it. When she finally tried to argue and demand explanations, the landlord stepped forward professionally. He reminded her clearly and calmly that she wasn't listed on the lease agreement and therefore had no legal right to remain in the apartment. She had until midnight to remove all her belongings. If she didn't, everything remaining would be placed on the curb. She looked at me like she genuinely expected compassion or reconsideration. Like maybe if she looked hurt enough, I'd change my mind about everything. Like the months of lying could be overlooked if she just seemed sad enough right now. I had absolutely no compassion left to give her. That well had run completely dry weeks ago when I'd watched her laugh with her ex while supposedly visiting family. When I'd realized the full extent of her deception and how little I'd actually meant to her. "We can talk about this," she said desperately. "Please, let's just talk. I can explain." "You have until midnight," I repeated quietly, cutting her off. There was nothing to discuss, nothing she could say that would change what I'd already seen and decided. The landlord nodded firmly, backing up my statement with his official authority. This wasn't a negotiation. It was done. I didn't yell or gloat or list her betrayals. I just walked out calmly with the movers, leaving her standing in the center of the room surrounded by her scattered belongings. Behind me, her voice cracked as she called my name and asked desperately if we could please talk, begged me to reconsider. I didn't turn around, didn't even pause. The conversation she wanted was months too late. She had countless opportunities to be honest with me. She'd chosen deception every single time. Now she could face the consequences of those choices completely alone. The movers loaded the last boxes while I walked to my car. I heard her voice still calling from inside the apartment, growing more desperate. The landlord's calm voice responding professionally. Then I closed my car door and the sounds cut off entirely. I sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, feeling nothing but quiet relief. No anger, no sadness, no regret. Just the simple peace of knowing I was finally free from someone who'd never really valued me. I started the engine and pulled away without looking back at the building, headed toward my new apartment and my new life, leaving her to clean up the mess she'd created. In my new apartment, the silence felt heavy at first but ultimately clean, like fresh air after being trapped in a stuffy room for too long. Friends told me I handled the situation better than they would have, that I'd been remarkably calm and strategic. I didn't feel particularly triumphant about it, just free. The final thing I did was block her number completely. She sent dozens of texts in the first few hours, apologies, explanations, desperate pleas to talk. I read none of them, just blocked her and deleted the message thread entirely. She wanted to live a double life so badly. Now she could, just without me in it. I spent that first night in my new place unpacking slowly and methodically, setting up my space exactly how I wanted it. No compromises, no considering someone else's preferences, just mine. It felt strange but good, like reclaiming a part of myself I'd lost. Eventually, I realized that leaving her with an empty shell wasn't really revenge. It was just justice, natural consequences for deliberate betrayal. She destroyed what we had through her own choices. I'd simply made sure I wouldn't be destroyed along with it. I moved on with my life, slowly rebuilding the confidence and trust she'd damaged. Months later, I heard through mutual friends she'd had to move back with her parents, that her relationship with her ex had fallen apart quickly. Part of me felt vindicated. Mostly, though, I just felt grateful I'd escaped when I did, before wasting any more time on someone who'd never really loved me. The silence in my apartment wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful, and that was enough.